Good afternoon and welcome to the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm Glenda Rose, President of Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. I'm here with State Archaeologist Dr. Sarah Sportman, co-host Scott Brady, and our amazing guests. Today's show is going to be one for the record books, as we have three icons of Connecticut archaeology here in the studio to reminisce, talk about their experiences over the years, and regale us with some of their crazier adventures. Just getting these three guys together at the same time to engage in conversation and banter is a real coup, so thanks to Sarah. I doubt that 1 hour will be enough time to discuss the years of combined experiences, so we may need to schedule a part 2 in the future. But for now, join us for this special hour and enjoy the show. If you have a question or anecdote, please send us a quick email to info@icrvradio.com, and we'll do our best to fit it in. Here's Sarah to introduce our three famous or infamous guests and start the show.
Hi, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the summer so far. We've all been really looking forward to this month's show. So tonight we're joined by Doctors Ken Fader, Nick Bellantoni, and Kevin McBride, three archaeologists who have spent their careers in Connecticut and who have had an incredible impact on the archaeology of our region. First, as students coming up through the field of the 1970s and 80s and really helping to develop it. Then as researchers, writers, and the teachers and mentors of a couple of generations of younger archaeologists. Their careers have run the gamut from indigenous and colonial sites to ancient aliens, vampires, and even Hitler. My hope for tonight is that we'll learn a lot and laugh a lot. So without further ado, let's begin the show. Based on the suggestion of FOSA member Jim Hall, we're calling this one 150 Years of Connecticut Archaeology.
I love it.
Oh, my God.
So
I just want everybody to know that Nick and Kevin are in the studio, but I'm at home. Because the rule is, it's just like the president, the vice president, and the speaker of the House can all be in the same place at the same time, because it's too rich a target. So the three of us can't be together, because then if somebody were to take us out, there's 150 years of archaeology completely disappeared.
right, and all those site forms that you haven't filled out.
Yeah.
That's not why, Kenny. You're the oldest. We don't want you to travel.
I don't know about that. I think I might have that record. We all checked our Depends before we came over here, so we should be all fine.
So let me just start this off by posing the first question. How did you all find each other?
In the woods.
How did this
That's
go?
true.
Oh, my God. This was recommended by my parole officer that I did these two guys.
So, yeah, we were...
I was at UConn at 73, I think was my first year in grad school. And Kevin, were you the next year in 74?
Yeah, 75.
All right.
And I didn't get there till 79. They rejected my application the first time I applied to the anthropology department for grad school. So I kept reapplying, and finally they figured the only way to get rid of me was just to take me and flunk me and so forth. So, and then I ended up teaching there. So you talk about revenge.
No kidding, right? If I'm not mistaken, yeah, it must be. Was it in class or in field school that I met you, Kevin?
Yeah, field school. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Woodchuck Knoll, right?
Woodchuck Knoll. You were my mentor.
Oh, no, please.
Yeah, nice. There was Doug and there was you. Doug Jordan.
Yeah. Right.
And
can we talk about Doug today?
we gotta.
the late, great. Listen. Just to put this kind of like to set it on a path of talking about archaeology, but also personalities. In the summer of '74, they wanted to keep me on campus, and so they got me some funding. And for half of the summer, I worked in Gene Eigner's archaeology lab.
Yep.
And I was counting like seal bones or something like that. I won't mention any names, but I was in the lab. Another student had a necklace with a pendant of I think it was a seal baculum, a penis bone. And he thought this was like a really good conversation starter.
It's called a baculum.
Yeah, baculum. But here I am working in the lab, and this guy is, you know how people absent-mindedly will chew on a pencil? No, I'm absolutely serious. He was chewing But the second 4 weeks of that summer, they said, okay, Doug Jordan needs your help. So I ended up as his field assistant. And the thing that I saw, and this brings us to some of Kevin's work, was that Doug was a product of his time. And he knew, put those in scare quotes, that preservation was really terrible in Connecticut soil. The acidity was so high. So he was not bringing feature soil back to the lab for any kind of analysis. And in fact, and this is absolutely true, one of the students in the field school asked Doug if he could bring that soil home for his garden. And he told Doug he had this rich tomato garden and needed the extra soil, and he brought it home. The kid confided in me that he wasn't growing tomatoes, he was growing marijuana, which is kind of this wonderful connection between archaeology and drugs. But when because I took a field school with Kent Vickery at the University of Cincinnati. This is in the early 70s. And Kent, the late great Kent Vickery, was a student and or a colleague of Stu Straver. So these are real, these people who are today are like icons in archaeology. They're real people. And so Vickery was a real stickler for bringing stuff back to the lab or for floating it on site. So I remember we had these galvanized buckets where they had cut the bottoms out of it and welded in hardware cloth. And there was me and Nancy Sheeler, one of the archaeology students in University of Cincinnati, in Maple Creek, which is a tributary of the Ohio River, and we were literally floating stuff in those buckets in the creek and pulling all this stuff out. So I ended up convincing Doug, and Doug made it real clear. I would have to bring the soil back because he didn't want anything to do with it because he thought it was a fool's errand. So I brought back bags of soil, and we just kind of hid it away someplace in Doug's office. And I just kind of left it there. And then, Kevin, you want to take the story from there?
Yeah, if I don't get charged.
You're fine, buddy, you're fine.
So those are the days, you hit on, a very interesting period that there's a lot of innovation. I mean, we consider it innovation then, but today it's like pretty standard, like flotation to recover, macrobotanical carbonized remains. Wow, what a unique thing. But I remember I was really focused on finding evidence for the domestication of Chenopodium as part of the Eastern Horticultural Complex. And, I didn't know. I don't want to get this bleeped. I didn't know anything. So, but I thought I did. And that's what characterizes all of us, right? We're we knew it all.
Oh, my God.
I was bugging Doug just to give me that soil. Now I realize from what you said why you didn't want to give it up so easy. But, and I bug him so much. And you were there this time in the lab. You remember I got him so mad. He literally tried to leap across the lab table and hit me.
No, Kevin is not exaggerating. I was there. It was super disconcerting because Doug was just kind of this laid-back dude.
Yes.
And nothing bothered him. I thought he was going to kill you, Kevin.
Thank God you were there, and I was on the other side. But he was really, and that was just the first of many times I got Doug angry. But he was a character. He's just such an old-time Harvard. Nothing against Harvard, but he was a very traditional archaeologist. Remember, he used to always wear a pith helmet when he dug.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he chose his sites based upon whether the site was next to a tree with ample shade. And that's why Woodchuck Knoll was, I think, that I still remember that big old tree and all those cow flops.
Yeah, yeah.
See, I missed all of that because, by the time I got to UConn, I wasn't taking any field schools with Doug or anybody there. I had already taken mine with Fred Warner, which is another story. Right. But my favorite Doug story is when he was going on sabbatical, and the department asked me to take the summer field school, take charge of the summer field school that year. So we did the field school after 3 weeks. Kevin was out at the time, and we were packing up to leave. And Doug, for the first time all summer, came out to see us. And So I gave him a tour of the site and so forth. But we were packing up and loading up the Suburban, whatever we had, and getting out of the wooded area we were excavating near the Connecticut River. There's no room in the truck. It's all full of equipment and students and so forth. And so I said to a couple of students, get out and wait here. I'll come back and get you so Dr. Jordan can, ride back with us. And Doug said, oh, no problem. And he jumps on the hood of the vehicle and he holds onto the windshield wiper and he said, don't worry, just go. And I'm like, and I'm driving now and I'm getting really nervous. I've got the state archaeologist on the hood of my truck. And this was rutted, back roads. There were gullies. I mean, it was all dirt. And so we're coming out of it. Kevin's sitting next to me in the car, and we're coming to a gully and a right turn. I don't know if Kevin remembers this, but
you took it really tight. I know that.
And Kevin says to me, hit the brakes hard and we'll create a position in the department.
And that's why I didn't.
We all got positions later, but not that time.
Fred.
Yeah, that seems like the next.
Yeah, it's just a natural thing. So I got a couple of good ones about Fred. This is actually how I met Nick, which is not a good story and reflection on Nick.
So let's back up and say this is Fred Warner, who was faculty at Central Connecticut State University and another of the state's early seminal archaeologists.
Yep.
Legendary
character.
Yeah.
No, it's part of my quest to, discover evidence of the Eastern Horticultural Complex. We've dug it when we were at Woodchuck Knoll. I think you guys were digging right across the river at
that's right,
Loomis Chafee School at Loomis Chafee.
We visited the site once that summer.
Yes, remember that? You were there. That's right. You were there. It wasn't Doug. Yeah, you were there. So we went across the river, and I'm talking to Fred. First time I've met him, and I, gave him the utmost respect because he's Fred Warner. He's an archaeologist from Central, et cetera, et cetera. And I go, Dr. Warner. I never called him doctor again. Dr. Warner, do you have any features? He goes, features? You want features? I'll show you some features. And he brings me down to where he had excavated. He loved his backhoe.
Oh, yeah, you bet.
And he excavated this 8-foot deep by 50-foot trench. And he said, features? See that sidewall? See those walls? And he's right. There were features throughout that he just dug through. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That was good. But
I was okay.
No, I'm throwing you under the bus here, Nick. Okay. Won't be the first time, and it won't be the last time. But as we're being introduced to his crew, I noticed this individual. And I just want to preface this by saying that we know Nick is one of the most brilliant archaeologists we know. Articulate, smart, engaging.
Anybody I know?
And I'm looking at this character in one of the units, and he's wearing an Italian T-shirt. He had just broken his leg in a softball game, so he's sort of dragging it and limping. I don't know if you ever saw Midnight Cowboy, Ratso Rizzo. That's kind of what he reminded me of. And I'm going, oh my! And of course he's swarthy, as you know. At one time we all had a contest to see who could grow a beard and how long it would take, and you won in a day.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
So that was the first time, and I'm going, wow. And then this is the early days of and you were built. Oh my God, you were like an Adonis, scary Adonis, but an Adonis. And this is when Fred was the only CRM game in town. So
right.
This is where we got our experience. So one time, Fred had offered me a job doing CRM, and I go, yeah, fine, great, So I remember he said, meet me here. I'm going to pick you up in the bus. And he stops at the bus, and I get on, and in the back of the bus is Nick in that T-shirt, that swarthy. And I'm not exaggerating. I thought he was a total thug. And I
was a pussycat.
And Fred drives us. I think it was Lake Warrena or wherever the heck that was outside of Waterbury. And he stops the van. He gets out and he points to this distant hill and he goes, "Go survey that hill." And we had no clue what we were doing. But beyond, I'm sure you were just concerned, like, what do we do? I was concerned with, I'm not making it back if I go to this guy. I am not exaggerating.
I'll give you some emphasis on that. When you and I were doing the lower Connecticut River Valley surveys, and we were in East Haddam, remember we were staying at Johnsonville? You had gotten the crew together the first day to give them an orientation, and there was a resort right across the street called Clark Crest, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I showed up late, and I was coming, and I had my, Italian T-shirt, what they call wife beaters today, I guess, evidently, and looking like you described. And Paul Costa was there, and I met him for the first time. And Paul said to me, "When you showed up, we all thought you were part of the kitchen help."
Yeah, your reputation always preceded you, Nick.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
But we're going to continue on Fred. Fred had a kind of an odd perspective on how you were supposed to do CRM and how you were supposed to write up those reports. But he was doing work in Greenwich, and he was doing it for the town, I believe, as a CRM project. And I knew he was down there, and I was not part of that at that point. And Fred showed up at my house with a cardboard box. And I said, "Hey, Fred, how you doing? Come on in." And he came in with the box, and he opened the box, and in it was an entire human skeleton. No. And he had excavated it that afternoon, the whole thing. And I said, "Fred, what the hell? What?" And he goes, "Yeah, we found a skeleton. Not a burial." I said, and you just excavate it and put it in a box? He goes, "Yeah." And it wasn't even like he had any notion that maybe that wasn't the best approach to excavating.
He didn't use the backhoe.
Holy God, right? And he was, the people in Greenwich were really unhappy about it because this is a multi-million-dollar project. It's developing like 6 1 acre or 2 acre parcels, and obviously these were going to go for like millions of dollars. And he brought back, I don't even know what became of that skeleton. I don't know who analyzed it or if he got in trouble for just digging it up out of the ground in an afternoon. But I knew that Fred did things quickly, but I did not expect him to dig up an entire human skeleton in an afternoon.
Yeah, we saw that was reburied at a later date after I became state archaeologist. But there was another thing with Fred. This was and Kevin could talk about this. This was the beginning of cultural resource management in Connecticut, where now we were actually doing archaeological surveys, contracted for proposed development projects, and Fred had through his Connecticut Archaeological Survey.
Right.
The DOT, he had the Department of Transportation contract, and I remember working with him. We were doing the I-84, where it was Route Set 15, and they were going to create this highway now going through eastern Connecticut from Hartford to Sturbridge, and he had us out there doing survey. But the interval of test pits was like a quarter mile.
Yeah.
We were like,
that seems about right.
And it was like, and he couldn't understand why we couldn't find sites. We were just separated through this whole region, just trying to, put one 50 by 50 test pit in the ground and think that was going to suffice. But that was the early days. I mean, we didn't know better either, I don't think. It was just getting going.
I mean, we used to talk about whether we should screen or not.
Yes.
And Doug Jordan was convinced if you're a real archaeologist, you don't have to screen.
That's right. You should find everything in your unit.
Well, I had when I started in Farmington River Project, and I was putting test pits in 10 meters apart. Fred sat me down and said, Kenny, you can't find sites digging test pits. I said, Fred, we're finding sites. He goes, really? He says, I've never found a site digging test pits. We just find them by people telling them where the sites are. And he understood that we were doing something very differently, and this was a new approach as far as he was concerned, and we were successful in finding stuff, the kinds of things that he would never find. But I don't know that it ever really changed his mind, his opinion that you don't find sites digging test pits. You find sites by talking to folks who are out there walking plowed fields. And it's why that so much of the sample, if you look at all the sites that he wrote up for CAS early on, that's not a representative or random sample. It was a sample of where amateurs are picking stuff up because they're walking plowed fields, which is why Fred could very easily say, and Doug the same, there aren't any sites on the uplands. There are no sites away from the rivers, which is what Doug told me that when I started doing the Farmington Project. He flat out said, well, good luck with that. Other than, Lewis Walpole and a couple of other sites in there, you're not going to find anything because it's inland and upland. And I don't know if that stuff ever really fully penetrated. That what we were doing was new, and it was innovative for our area, and it actually was successful.
That's true. I mean, the whole of Eastern Connecticut, when we did our part of the I-84 extension highway, I mean, we got the same advice. There's no sites, and yet we found hundreds and hundreds of sites.
Right. Uh-huh.
It's kind of scary that we learned what we know initially from those guys, and,
But they left us something, I think. And, we were cocky grad students and thinking we could always do better. And, and our students will say the same thing about us. But the fact is that, they did give us a foundation, but in some cases we had to kind of explore it ourselves and figure out flotation like you did and, what the appropriate intervals were and screen sizes and so forth. But, it was... we were all doing it at the seat of our pants.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation going on that wouldn't be innovative today, but,
Well, I mean, we're still having discussions, I think, about intervals for testing in different different environments and things like that. And, a lot of it is trying to balance the finding sites with the time and the cost. But it does seem like tighter is better for finding sites. That seems to be the take-home message. So,
right. Well, remember, even in American antiquity, you had Ken Kinteig, I guess, was the archaeologist, who was actually doing all these statistical simulations of how far apart sites are, how big the sites are, how far apart the test pits would have to be in order to encounter a representative sample. So it wasn't just Connecticut who were kind of groping. It was everybody was sort of groping with, well, when do you get diminishing returns for the amount of effort you're putting into finding sites? And you don't need to find every site. You want a sample of them. So we still all groping with that stuff because there's no definitive answer.
Yeah, sample was a part of the discussion back then. I don't hear many of us talking about it today. I think, we went from this, sampling 10% of a site to, we're not going to find anything. We're not going to know anything. You got to just open it up. And I think that's definitely been a trend of late. You don't really see anything without a broad horizontal perspective on an area. But I have a question for you, Ken.
Yeah.
You kind of, betrayed us. You kind of left us. You kind of abandoned us. You started doing all that weird stuff with, Hotel of the Mysteries and, aliens. How did you find yourself trending toward that? It's fascinating and it's important, but I'm just always been curious how you actually began to focus on that.
I should be lying down now. You should be taking notes, like, as a therapy session. When I was a kid, I was super interested in weird shit. Weird stuff, right? UFOs, paranormal, ghosts, ESP. And it was always kind of a theme. And at some point, I joined a book club of a paranormal book club, right? And there was a book about ghosts, and there was one about witchcraft. and there was a book called The Morning of the Magicians, and it was written by these two French guys. And everything that you read in Eric von Däniken and a lot of the stuff you read in Graham Hancock and all these really famous guys now was already in this book, Morning of the Magicians. And but there was perpetual motion machines and astrology, and there's an entire chapter about archaeology. And the book, to me, wow, this is real stuff. But archaeology was the only thing that at the point I read it, I actually knew something about. And I read that chapter and said, oh my God, these guys are crazy. None of this is true. And it just inspired in me a desire to kind of track down other people who have these incredibly pseudoscientific, anti-scientific approaches to studying the human past. And then when I started teaching at Central, Nick, I bet you remember this. There was every department had a course that was like a real baby course called Search. And so where the introduction to archaeology was Anthropology 150, and introduction to cultural anthropology is 140, and physical anthropology is 160. Search in anthropology was 100, and it was supposed to be like get freshmen first semester, just kind of give them a popular approach to your field. So when I first got there, they said, okay, Ken, you're going to teach search in anthropology. And I had no idea what the hell that was. So I went in the first day, and okay, archaeology, the kids know this. And these kids, for the most part, have just been pushed into the class. And I sat down, and I said, look, I'm an archaeologist. This is the first time I've ever taught this class. What would you like to hear about? And I literally took out a piece of paper. And kids started raising their hands after a little bit of shyness. And you know what they said? Well, we want to hear about ancient astronauts. We want to hear about Atlantis. Oh, Stonehenge, pyramids. And so I got this list together, and I thought, wow, this is like straight out of Morning of the Magicians. It's all that crap that these guys were talking about in the early 60s, and now here we are in the 1977, 1978. And so I put that list together, and I tracked down a book by Robert Walkup, who was at the University of Texas, called Lost Tribes and Sunken Continents. But it was out of print, so we got some used copies of it. And the students loved the class. And I loved teaching. I thought it was really cool, and it was kind of really out there. And I was able to use that stuff as a way of introducing how archaeology really works. So it's one thing to say, well, the Egyptians couldn't build the pyramids. It must be ancient aliens. And it's another thing to say, yeah, but this is what Egyptologists have actually found that helps us understand how Egyptians actually did build the pyramids. And so the next year, I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to introduce this as a full-time, not a search course, but as an actual course. And I'll always remember that when you had to fill out this paperwork and get it passed by the curriculum committee, and then by the education committee, and then the dean had to sign off on it, and then the vice president, and the president. So everybody. So along the way, there's this filter of sure that the course is legitimate, it's an academic approach. So of course, my first mistake was I named it. What the hell? I named it Ancient Mysteries. And as soon as we got to the curriculum committee, they didn't like that title. They said, no, that's too popular. And then, of course, I used the word astronomy in the course description, talking about astronomy. And somebody raised their hand in the committee and said, well, I don't think you should be teaching about astrology. I explained to this person in, the English department that, well, astronomy, astrology, they're like two different things. But finally, the course got approved, and it became one of the most popular courses in our department. And people loved talking about that stuff. And the nicest part about it was that even years after the fact, I'd get students contacting me saying, Fair, I saw this show about ancient aliens, and I told all the people around them, you really have to read Fader's book because all of this is absolute nonsense. So there's this really cool feedback. And look, if I'm the guy people want to go to when they want to do a documentary about Atlantis or aliens or Piltdown Man or the Carter Giant, I'll do that, sure. And at the same time, real deal archaeology through my Farmington River project. So, and one, I just got hooked on it. It was super enjoyable. And then, of course, I wrote the book, Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries, and that became like a big deal, and people use that book. It's going into its like 11th edition now, which it was published in 1990. In 2025, it will be in its 11th edition, with chapters about mystery stuff, the Cart of Giant and Piltdown, but then stuff about how the mound builders had this racist undercurrent, and the Lost Planet of Atlantis, and there's no evidence for that. And now with Graham Hancock and his Ancient Apocalypse series, I get to deal with that. Pseudo-archaeology is the gift that keeps giving. And there will never be a time when they come to me, Oxford University Press comes to me and says, we need a new edition of Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries. There'll never come a time when I'll say, well, there's nothing new to say. There's nothing more to say. But damn it, these people are busy making stuff up. And the problem there, of course, and I'm on Facebook and on Twitter, is you get a lot of people thinking that archaeology, but seriously, that me and Nick and Kevin, all of us are part of big archaeology, and we have meetings on alternate Thursdays where we try to hide the awful truth from the public. I've never gotten clear what awful truth we could possibly have, but we're part of the conspiracy, and we're keeping it quiet. If you know archaeologists, you know how much they drink, the ability of an archaeologist to keep this stuff quiet is absolutely ridiculous. But that's sort of where the career went.
I don't want to take you guys down a notch, but I've known you all for a long time, and if you guys are big archaeology is not very big to start with.
So I've got two stories about that. One is it was in 2009. I was in Germany on a project we won't talk about, and while I was there, we had come off the field for the day, and I was lounging in the hotel room and started surfing on the TV. And here in Germany, there shows up on the screen Ken Fader, who is speaking in German and talking about ancient astronauts. I said, well, I can't get away from this guy.
No,
but the other story is that when I was before I started college, I was in the United States Navy. I spent 4 years, and being out at sea all the time, I had a lot of time to read. And one of the books I read was Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. And I got to tell you, Ken, I was like taken with it. I thought this was so interesting. And of course, I had no knowledge to put it in its context like I would later. But when I finally went to college, that was one of the books that kind of intrigued me to take an elective course in introductory anthropology that I ended up staying on. So, maybe
That's why we all got into archaeology. Kenny won't admit it, but that's why we did.
You never know.
And we get those sweet checks from big archaeology to make sure we keep the stuff
the
quiet.
residuals.
When people say, I have received emails from people saying, Vader, you know more than you're letting on. I don't know why, but you're part of this.
Yeah, we know better.
To keep it all quiet. But here's the deal. Why would we ever want to keep any of this quiet? How would we benefit from people not knowing what the age of the oldest site in the New World is? How would we benefit from hiding the fact that agriculture developed all over the world? How would we benefit if we hid this stuff? That's always been sort of mysterious. They get that far with you're hiding stuff, but then when you ask them, why would we hide anything? I never hear a satisfactory answer to that question.
So I'm curious, and I can actually address this to Sarah. So, I mean, these kinds of, this interest in the public of various theories is ongoing. And one of the things I've always, I don't know if admires the right word, but was sort of always interested in is, with Nick and Brian and Sarah, you guys would field some of the most incredible inquiries and calls. And I was just like flabbergasted, like, wow. So I could ask you, Sarah, what's your best story? But have you noticed an uptick in these kinds of calls, inquiries with Graham's show and, similar ones?
Oh, yeah. I think a couple of things have contributed. One, I think, was the pandemic. People had a lot of time to just like wander around and look at the landscape and ponder it, I think, and try to understand it. And they don't always have the same kind of historical or geographical or geological framework that we all have from our training to understand that, right? I think Graham Hancock's show on Netflix has been a huge driver of this. And the other one is Oak Island, which I know Scott loves to talk about. But I mean, it get calls all the time, and people are always trying to tie in whatever thing that they're trying to sell that particular day to one of these things, like peopling of the Americas or Oak Island and the Masons and buried treasure and
Phoenicians
conspiracies and Vikings. And I mean, pick your favorite historical conspiracy, but it seems like there's a lot of it. And that's probably always been the case, but I don't know if there's more now.
Yeah, we always had, people, we interacted with the public so often. And I remember once I had a guy come into my office at UConn, and he had a flat fieldstone. Now, the fieldstone had kind of an hourglass shape to it, kind of curvature, and did his best to convince me that the fieldstone was actually a shoe worn by Neanderthals to walk on the ice so they could hunt mastodons, and that the Neanderthals had built stone walls to trap the mastodons. Of course, the stone walls are only up to your hip for the most part. Don't really.
But that's kind of integrating everything. That's a good theory.
But yeah, so I had to try to gently make him understand why this is not a hypothesis that could possibly fly. But we've had so many of these kind of stories.
Yeah, it's a long tradition.
Yeah, we still see them when we're out doing like artifact IDs. Recently, we had a gentleman who said, if you take this rock, you can't see it now, but if you take a picture of it, you'll see that it's an exact image of a human face. I said, well, that's great. I said, but they didn't have cameras then. He really didn't have a good answer for that.
But, people are curious. People want to learn, I think. And I agree with you, Kenny. I think we have an obligation to explain why these are false hypotheses or not going to work. But people are curious, and they want to know, and they want to learn. And so hopefully we can do that job of helping them.
My favorite story about this is I gave my standard Cardiff Giant lecture, which is real. It's entertaining. It's fun. And I gave it at a historical society. And at the end of the lecture, a person approached me. And Nick, you know who this guy is. I don't know if Kevin and Sarah know who he is, but he's around. He walks the woods of Connecticut and finds evidence of a race of giants building things or whatever. Anyway, at the end of the lecture, he comes up to me with these two those ring binders filled with plastic sleeves. And in the sleeves are lots and lots and lots of photographs of big rocks, some in the middle of the woods, some in open fields. And he comes up to me and says, well, Dr. Fader, I know you talk about frauds, but these aren't frauds, are they? What do you think they are? Looked at the photographs, and it was, not being at each of these places, it was hard to say, but I was 95% convinced these photographs of glacial erratics all throughout southern New England. And I said to him, well, that as far back as the 18th century, European geologists were finding these rocks that were out of place. That is, they're raw material from the bedrock in that area, and they were able to trace them to glaciers on the tops of mountains, and they called them erratics, and we have erratics here. His response, and listen very carefully to what he said to me, his response was, well, Dr. Finn, I don't know anything about geology, but I know they're not erratics.
Yeah.
How? No, this was a reasonably articulate person. How do you put those words together and not have the light bulb go up over your head and go, oh, that's why I don't know what these things are? No, seriously. I don't know anything about geology, and they're not erratic. Whoa, I don't know anything about I think that's symptomatic. That's an issue also about the mistrust of experts.
Yeah.
It's kind of paradoxical because they come to Kevin, they come to Sarah, they come to Nick, they come to me because we are experts. They say, "What is this?" We give them our expert opinion, and they go, "You don't know what you're talking about." Well, if you're going to mistrust, says.
Well, I mean, I know that Sarah and Nick and Brian all have dealt with multiple people who, came to them, didn't like the answer, and then went at least across the country, if not around the world, to find an archaeologist that would probably just to get them to stop calling and sending emails, say, well, yeah, it could be, whatever, an ancient Mayan pecan carving.
Yeah, I think it's more that people don't want your expert opinion; they want validation of what they've already decided, and I think that's the sticky part of it.
Exactly. Yep.
And this is what I tell with these folks that about, I'll say 50-50. Half of them, you let them down lightly, and they're disappointed that they didn't find the carving of Indian. And a really nice guy come to me, and it's a piece of quartzite, and it was all naturally weathered. But he was absolutely sure. But if you hold it in your hand and you look at it at this angle with the light, doesn't it look like like a Native American profile? And you explain how quartzite erodes, and you explain that, and they feel really they're let down, and they're really sorry. They feel bad about it. But then half the people get angry at you. What do you mean? What do you? That can't be natural. You just kind of shrug your shoulders. Oh well. But you do your best, right?
I had a guy come into the office with literally a suitcase on rollers, and opened it up, and there were just tons of stones in there, just natural stones.
Right.
They had weathered in certain areas and so forth, and he said, I found this in Connecticut, but I believe it originally came from Africa. May have come, somehow across the ocean. I'm not quite sure. And he said, if you hold it this way, can you see the elephant? And I said, no, I don't see the elephant. But you're not looking right. You see, then you put a light on it and the whole works. And then he said to me, well, you must see the spaceship in the background.
Oh, good Lord.
And I said, no, I don't see that either. I said, well, why don't you go to a geologist and see if they can see if this is a rock from Africa? But, you do get all kinds. But again, I think, we try to handle it with kid gloves and try to point out to them where they're, if possible, where they may be going wrong in their interpretation.
Sometimes they have something.
Yeah.
All the
absolutely.
time, right? How many sites have been discovered because someone from the public came forward with an interesting find or just an odd question?
Many.
Absolutely.
Do you guys, your blade cache is 30 gorgeous 6, 7, 8-inch long blades that this guy found in Granby? Well, the owner of the property, Mr. Glazier, he contacted me, and I blew him off because it was basalt. And it just had, if you go up on the Connecticut Mountain, you find all these basalt blades that erode right out of the bedrock. And they're long, and they're narrow, they're black, and they look kind of sharp, but you can see exactly where they're eroding out of the bedrock. So this guy calls me, and he explains what he has found. At this point, it was 16, these long, narrow, kind of, they're weathered, so there's like a patina on them, but he actually took like a wire brush, and it was black on the inside. And I blew him off. The guy lived like 15 minutes from where I was living in Simsbury. And I blew him off. I said, I'll come at some point. And months later, he called me back and said, I really would like you to come and take a look. And I finally said, yeah, fine. And I drove to his house, and he had this big, gorgeous, like maple dining table, and he had a white sheet over it. And right on top of that sheet were 16 amazing out of, I think it was stone. And they're huge and gorgeous. And
Hey,
I
Ken?
basically said to him,
Ken, can I interrupt you a second? Can you say again what they were? You cut out.
oh, they were siltstone.
There you go.
But they're, siltstone. And so when I saw them, I said, Mr. Glazier, why didn't you tell me about these? He goes, I'm telling you, I did. He said, you should have come to my house, kidnapped me, tied me up, put me in the back of your car, and driven me here. But I didn't learn my lesson. He said, look, we were going to be in the McLean Game Refuge, which is near his house, doing the survey there. And he said, well, when your crew is out here, would you like to come and, where I found this? There are a drain pipe behind his house. And I said, well, sure, Mr. Glazier, but you've been poking around here for years, it turns out, and so I'm sure you've got all of them. But, sure, to humor him, I took a crew of like 3 or 4 people and set them there. By the time they were done, they had 14 more of the blades and enough charcoal for a couple of radiocarbon assays, and it was 1,500 BP, thereabouts. And that was an instance in which, I was skeptical, and I wasn't going to follow up on it, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
So I guess, another thing that I kind of want to talk on, because we've been talking a lot about, the development of the field and how it evolved over time and how, a lot of that happened during the course of your careers. I think one thing that's kind of you've all dealt with is adding into archaeology, actually working with the descendants of people, from the past, right? Native American communities, African American communities, anybody's descendant community. And that is something that, for a long time, archaeologists would never have considered doing. And how did that all get started? Because I know you all had a lot of experience working with that over the years.
Well, I would say it happened with Kevin McBride, with his relationship with the Mashantucket Pequots. That was really, that really had a profound change in the, and most of our attitudes and working relationships. And then, of course, Ken with the lighthouse site and the descendants from there. But, our earliest contacts were with Kevin at Mashantucket.
It was a process. I mean, I think, back then, because of our training, we didn't think indigenous people had any information to give us because, culture change, you don't speak the language, the whole standard stuff. My education actually started with John Brown, Narragansett, now medicine man at the time, at the R1000 burial site. But, through those experiences, and you were with me the whole time, and we were able to encounter a lot of incredible indigenous people in the state and the area. And they gave us an education, sometimes gently, sometimes not. And I remember Trudy Lamb Richmond, who I adore, consider one of my best friends. The first time I sat with her, she just like beat the out of me. And she was an anthro. I mean, she was a MA anthro from UConn.
That's right.
But we used to dismiss their people's perspective because there's no direct connection with the past. It's not like you're at Zuni or, Navajo country where there's a direct connection. The idea was that there's a large distance and time and cultural tradition and, et cetera, et cetera. Native people here have going on 400 years of impacts. But, what I learned is the trick is listen, first of all. Really listen. And many of the Native people I've dealt with over the years have a unique knowledge set because they not only have this access and know the same sources I know, but they've grown up in a different cultural tradition. So they're bringing a cultural perspective informed by the same sources that we would normally use. Ella Sekatow, the Narragansett medicine woman, was an ethnohistorian, was really good because she epitomized that that kind of perspective. And I think you still need to be aware and cognizant of the quality of the information, but that's the mistake I made, is to dismiss a lot of this to begin with. And it's, but you and I mean, I always, back in the day, we were the ones that early on were working with indigenous people about reburial in the 80s and 90s before well before NAGRA, and I think that kind of solidified our relationship with a lot of indigenous people too.
Yeah, in our case, we even as a graduate student, UConn had from some of the field schools 7 Native American individual skeletal remains, and our department head at the time, Robert B., had asked me to do an analysis of them, do age, sex, diseases, and whatever I could tell from the remains, and prepare them for reburial with the Native American community. This had to be in the early 80s, 1980s, and we did that, and I got to meet Ed Sarabia at that time, and Mickey Agostada, if you remember Mickey.
Sure.
She was Cherokee, but she was head of the Indian Affairs with the Department of Transportation. Ed would take over on that, and it was just a growing relationship. I like to think and hope there was trust involved in that relationship as it evolved. But they, Ed, I love the man. He's Tlingit, by the way. He's a native Alaskan. He taught me so much, and I'm forever indebted to him. But we were doing that before there were, federal laws providing for reburial. We were doing that, before the Native Americans Graves Protection and Repatriation Act.
Yeah, I think the key was developing personal relationships.
Exactly. And when I used to go, to state archaeologist meetings around the country, and with various meetings and conferences and so forth, just talking to people, Connecticut was way out ahead in this than many of the other states, most of the other states, if not all of the other states, especially the states out west. Connecticut was really going here in the 80s with Kevin and Kenny. And Ken, your experience with the Lighthouse descendants.
So we have a couple more minutes left. Is there any final thoughts or interesting stories you'd like to leave us with?
You got the best stories, Nick. Can you do one in a minute?
But we haven't got the time. We'll have to come back.
Oh,
we could do that.
That's fine.
But just to say that, we talk about, our past instructors and Fred Warner and Doug Jordan. We do so and we make light of it. But, they taught us a great deal, and we went off on our own, sometimes deviating from what they taught us. But it's a growing process. And just like you guys, having mentored with Kevin, and that next generation of archaeologists and the generation after that, we had an interesting place in that process. But you guys are the legacy, the real, the archaeologists today that learned from our mistakes as we did from our predecessors.
Building on the shoulders of giants.
That's right.
Basically, they just ignore us anymore.
The humor.
Yeah.
Well, I was saying Kevin was out in the field just this summer with a whole new crop of undergrads, so he's still at it. But so unfortunately, we lost Ken on the line. But we are kind of running out of time here and need to wrap it up. I hope we can do this again and maybe revisit some of I don't know, different stories, some more things. I'd like to hear more about the culture of graduate school. It was legendary when I was in grad school.
Well, the few pictures that exist, it's certainly a different feel than what we're doing in the field today.
Clothing.
There's a lot less clothing.
Yeah.
And,
A lot more beer.
Yeah, that's true. The fashion sense over time is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
That's right. And the three of us, Kenny, Kevin, and I were in the thick of it when a lot of it hit the fan. This leaves you in mystery, folks, so that you'll want to come back and listen to the
tune in
second
for a
stage.
second episode. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Kevin, Kenny, and Nick.